So in this chapter, chapter 11, we're going to be looking at fractions and introducing fractions, decimals and percentages. So our lesson objective today is to be able, first of all, to convert between fractions, decimals and percentages. Now we know that percent means out of 100. So 20%, if we wanted to write that as a fraction, would mean 20 out of 100. 20 over 100, but we shouldn't forget to simplify. Fraction, so 20 over 100. So if I was to write this as an answer, I would say, well, 20% is 20 over 100, or 20 out of 100, cancelling down, which we always do if we have answers to be in a fraction. Divide both by 10 would first of all give me 2 tenths, and we can simplify further, divide both numerator and denominator by 2 to give 1/5. Now remember, with fractions, whatever you do, multiply or divide the numerator by, you must also do the same to the denominator. And you can see that we could have done that in one step. We could have actually just divided straight by 20. On this next slide, we want to change a fraction into a percentage without using a calculator. So if percent means out of 100, what we want to do is to, in this example, to write 2/5 as a percentage. So the first thing we do, I'll just copy it down here. We said OK, 2/5. To be out of as a percentage, we want to change the denominator so it's out of 100. I know that 5 is a factor of 100. So if I multiply 5 by 20 and do the same to the numerator, times 2 by 20, that will give me 40 out of 100, which we know is 40%. At the first example, they did it in 2 stages. It really doesn't matter. It depends how confident you are with your number work. On this next slide, I've got a few examples for you to try. We'll do the first one together, and then you can pause this slide and have a go at the other questions and then check to see whether or not your answers are correct. So in the first one, we've been asked to change 3/10 into a percentage. So 3/10, we know that 10 is a factor of 100, so it goes into 100 exactly. So 10/10s, if I multiply 10 by 10, it will give me the 100. So I must do the same to the numerator. 3 times 10 is 30. So 3/10 can be written as 30%. You can now pause this video and have a go at the others. Now you can see the answers to question 1, 3 and 5. They were quite straightforward in that both 10, 20 and 4 were all factors of 100. So 4, as long as 4 times 25 gave you 100, so 7 times 25 gave you 175. And similarly, in this example, we multiplied by 5 to give us 35 over 100, which is 35%. Now, question 4 was slightly different in that 8 is not a factor of 100, but it is one worth remembering how to do. It's one worth just listening carefully at. Now we know that if we've got 1/4, if I wanted to change that over 100, I would multiply by 25. So I know that 4 times 25 is 100. So understanding your number work is useful here. So if I double 4, that will give me 8. But then I've got to remember to half 25. So 4 times 25 is 100, which means that 8 times 12.5 will also be 100. Now this fact will help me answer 3/8. So how can I write 3/8 as a percentage? Well, one method is to say, okay, 3/8. I know that if I multiply that by 12.5, it will give me 100. So 3 times 12.5, 3 12s, 12, 24, 36. 3 halves is 1.5, so that gives me 37.5 divided by 100. So now I know that 3/8 we can write as 37.5%. It's worth remembering that one, it does come up a lot. So here are your answers for questions 2, 4 and 6. So the main point here is that to change a fraction into a percentage, try and multiply the denominator by a number to change it so that it's over 100. Changing decimals into a percentage is really easy. All you need to do is multiply by 100. So in question 1 we want to change 0.3 into a percentage. So 0.3 multiplied by 100. So you know how to multiply decimals by 100. We either think of it as moving the decimal point 2 places to the right, which would give me 30%, or you think of it, which is mathematically more correct, moving the digits 2 places to the left, which would give you 30%. So looking at question 2, 0.02 times 100, just really write percent there, would give you 2%. Now you can pause the video and have a go at the last two. Now working backwards, so this time we want to change we're given our percentage, so in the first example we've got 30%. We want to change this back into a fraction. Well, we know that 13% means 30 out of 100. Dividing both by 10 will give me 3 over 10. And we know that 3/10, and there we are, 3/10 is our fraction in its simplest form. So you can pause the slide and have a go at the next 3 questions. So here are the answers. So for question 3, the answer they're given is 6/5. You can write that as an improper fraction, a top-heavy fraction. So we can remember we can write that as a mixed fraction. So you could write it as 1 and 1/5. And similarly here in the last one, we have 13 over 5, which we could write as 2 and 3/5. Now percentages can be more than 100. It just means that you end up with more than what you started. There has been an increase. So far we've been able to change fractions to decimals by dividing the top. We can change fractions to decimals by dividing the top by the bottom, or changing the denominator into 10, 100 or 1,000. And we can change fractions to percentages by dividing the top by the bottom, or trying to get the denominator so it's over 100 by multiplying, and then doing the same to the numerator. So if we look at the examples here, so we want 3/5. So if I want to change 3/5 into a decimal and a percentage, I could say, okay, 3/5. If I multiply both the top and the bottom by, so if I can get that out of 10 by multiplying by 2 and do the same to the numerator, I can say it's 6/10. And 6/10 I know is 0.6. And 6/10 is also the same as 60 over 100, which is 60%. Or I could take my decimal, 0.6, and we know that changing a decimal into a percentage we can do by just multiplying by 100. So multiplying that by 100 would give me 60%. Now that one's quite straightforward because 5 goes into 10 and 100. It's a factor of 100. 2/7 is not quite as easy. So if you end up with a question like this, we can use the bus stop method. So we can say, you know that 2 over 7, our fraction line, is the same as a division. It means the same as 2 divided by 7. So using the bus stop method, I could say, okay, I've got my 2, and the bus stop is our divide sign, 2 divided by 7. And I'm going to add a decimal point and some zeros afterwards. Now we then start our division. So 7 into 2 doesn't go, so I put down a 0. I'm just going to change my ink colour here so it's clearer. 7 into 2 doesn't go, so I carry the 2 over to the first 0 after the decimal point. 7 into 20 goes twice, so 2 7s are 14, so that gives me a remainder of 6. 7 into 60 goes 8 times, 8 7s are 56, so that gives me a remainder of 4. 7 into 40 goes 5 times, because 7 5s are 35, so I have a remainder of 5. 7 into 50 goes 7 times, because 7 7s are 49. So I'm going to have to add another 0 and put my remainder 1 there. 7 into 10 goes once, 1 7 is 7, and that gives me a remainder of 3. 7 into 30 goes 4 times, and that will give me a remainder of 2. So I get back to 7 into 20. So I can see that my decimal will then repeat. So 2/7 as a decimal is 0.285714, and if I want to change that into a percentage, I multiply it by 100. So multiplying by 100 will give me, sorry, that should go in there. Multiplying by 100 will therefore give me 28.5714%, which is to 1 decimal place. Second decimal place is 5 or more, so 28.6%. On this next slide, I want you to change these fractions into decimals and then percentages. Some of them will be straightforward, such as question 1, 3 and 4, and some of the others will require some division using the bus stop shelter. So you will probably use the bus stop shelter method for questions 5, 6, 7, and question 2 and 8. If you think back to one of the other slides, you should know what to multiply 8 by to change your denominator into 100. So if you stop the slide now and have a go, and then check your answers in a minute. So I've written the answers up for questions 1, 2, 3 and 4. You can pause this now just to check those. And now I'm going to work through question 5 with you. So question 5, 5 over 16 means 5 divided by 16, which I've written here. So I've got 5, bus stop shelter, 16 goes on the outside, and I've written some parts, some first 5 terms, 5, 6, 7 terms of the 16 times table just here to help me. And then we carry on as before. So I say 16 into 5 doesn't go, so I carry over my 5 And 16 into 50, well, here goes 1, 2, 3 16s of 48, and that gives me a remainder of 2. 16 into 20 goes once, and that gives me a remainder of 4. 16 into 40 goes twice, with a remainder of 8. And 16 into 80 goes 5 times exactly. So 5 divided by 16 is 0.3125, and if I want to change that to a percentage, I just multiply it by 100%, which gives me 31.25%. So I've got 5/16, 0.3125 as a decimal, multiply that by 100 gives me 31.25%. Taking question 6, I have 1/3 is 1 divided by 3. Using the bus stop match method, I can say 1 divided by 3, add a decimal point and some zeros afterwards. So let's work through it now, and this will give 3 into 1 doesn't go, 0, carry the 1 there, not 3, 1. 3 into 10 goes 3 times, carry the 1. 3 into 10, 3 times, 3 3s are 9, remainder 1. 3 into 10 goes 3 times, 3 3s are 9, gives me 1 remainder. 3 into 10, 3 times, gives me 1 remainder, and so on. So I can see in this question that 1/3 as a decimal is 0.3333 recurring, and if I want to change that into a percentage, it would give me, multiplied by 100, 33.3%. Next question, we have 2/3, which is 2 divided by 3. Putting up my bus stop shelter, I have 2 divided by 3. I'm going to put a decimal point and some zeros afterwards. So 3 into 2 doesn't go, 0, carry the 2 over. 3 into 20 goes 6 times, 3 6s are 18, I have 2 left over. 3 into 20 goes 6 times, 2 left over. 3 into 20, 6 times, 2 left over. 6 times, and so on. So here I can say 2/3 as a decimal is 0.6666 recurring, which as a percentage multiplied by 100 gives me 66.67% to 2 decimal places. So I'm rounding up, so I look at the 3rd decimal place, which would have been a 6, add 1 to the term in front. So here I can have 0.66666, which is 66.67%. And finally, the last one, we discussed this before. If we multiply that by 12.5, it's one worth remembering. That will give me 100. So 1 times 12.5 is 12.5. So 12.5 divided by, this remember is divided by 100, so as a decimal 0.125, and 12.5 over 100 we can write as a percentage, 12.5%. So there we go, 8 questions. Hopefully you got all those right. In these examples we want to change percentages into decimals and fractions. So if we want to change 20% into a decimal, it's easy. You would just divide your percentage by 100. So dividing that by 100 would give me 0.2. To change it into a fraction, I would say, okay, well 20 over 100, and then simplify. So that would be the same as 2 over 10, which is 1/5. If I take 48%, again, if we want to change that into a decimal, we will just divide by 100. So divide by 100 would give me 0.48. If I want to write that as a fraction, 48 over 100 and simplify. So 24 over 50, 12 over 25, and we can't make that any smaller. Here are some questions for you to have a go at. So could you change these first of all into percentages by dividing by 100, and then change them into fractions by writing the percentage as a fraction, so in the first one 40 over 100, and then simplifying. So if you pause this video and then you can check your answers at the end. Now here are the answers to the first, move that out of the way, here are the answers to the first 6. So if you can pause this slide and check your answers, and you should be showing your working out and showing all your simplified fractions, not just answers only, please. I'm now going to delete these annotations and I'm going to go through questions 7 and 8. So 24.5%, to write that as a decimal is straightforward. It's a decimal percentage here, we just want to write it as a decimal. So we're going to divide it by 100, so that would give me 0.245. Now to write that as a fraction now, some of you might have gone straight to the 24.5% and said okay, or 24.5% means 24.5 out of 100. But we can't leave it like that because we can't, in our final answer, have a mixture of decimals and fractions. So to get rid of that decimal, we've done this before, we want to multiply that by 10. So if we multiply the numerator by 10, I get a whole number, so 240. So I've got to remember to do the same to the denominator. So 245 over 1,000. And now I can simplify that. I'm going to divide both by 5, so that will give me 49 over 200. And there we go. Last example, we have 33⅓%. So writing that as a decimal, I can say, okay, 33 1/3 is the same as 33.33333. It's just one you should know that a third is 0.333. And divide that by 100 will give me the decimal. So that will give me 0.3333 recurring. So that's my decimal. Now if I want to change that into a fraction, 33 1/3%, I can take this as the 33.3, I'll just stop there, recurring, over 100, which I can write as, changing that into a whole number, is 333 over 1,000, and I can't simplify it. So here we're going to change these decimals into percentages, which is quite straightforward. We first of all just multiply by 100, so we have 0.7 multiplied by 100, and that will give me 70%. If I want to change that into a fraction, I can either say 70 over 100, or I can see the 7 is in the 10th place, so I could write that as 7/10. And there we go. 60, 0.64. If I want to change that into a percentage, I just multiply it by 100%. So multiplying it by 100 gives me 64%. And change it into a fraction, so 0.64. The 4 here is in the hundredths, so I can just write that as 64 over 100 and simplify. 32 over 50, which is 16 over 25. So on this next slide, I'd like you to have a go at these. So pause this video, have a go at these, and there's a bit of a typo here. We want to change these decimals into percentages and fractions. Okay, so we want to change those into percentages and fractions. So pause the slide and off you go. So I've included the answers here, and I'm just going to quickly go over question 7 just to make sure that we can clarify anything here if we need to. So 0.125, to change that into a percentage, I just multiply it by 100. So that'll give me 12.5%. And to change that into a fraction, I look at the position of the last digit in the decimal, and that's in the thousandths. So I can write it as 125 over 1,000, and then simplify. I'm going to do that by dividing by 25. So 25 into 100 goes 4 times, and another 25, so that gives me 5. 25 in 100 goes 4 times, so in 1,000 it will be 40. And then divide by 5 again gives me 1/8. And the last one is going to, so there we have 12.5%, or 1/8. And you must remember to simplify your fraction. Here we'll have 33.3%, and we know that that's a third. It's just one you should learn. So our fraction would be 1/3. You can have a go now at questions 1 to 4 of exercise 11A. Be sure to show all your working out and make sure that any fractions in your final answer have all been simplified. So you can pause the slide now and have a go at those questions. Now we could use our understanding of percentages to answer problems, but here we just have a quick recap. So 1/3 is a percentage. That is just one you should really get used to know. So 1/3 is a percentage you should know is 33.3%, and there's some others that you should know. So I'm just going to remind you of these here. So we could also know that a quarter is 25%, and it'd be worth writing these down in your book. 1/2 is 50%. 3/4 is 75%. 1/3 is 33%, 33.3%. But actually 2/3 is 66.666%. I'll put a little dot on top to show that they're recurring. So they're worth remembering. There are a couple of others, and you'll just get to know them. As you get more confident, you'll recognise them. So 5/12 is a percentage, so we will have 5/12. If we want to change that into a percentage, we want our denominator. We could write it first of all as a fraction. So we can say, okay, 5/12 means 5 divided by 12. So I could have 5/12. I'm going to put that down there. 12 into 5 doesn't go. 0 down, carry 5. 12 into 50, well, 4/12 are 48. So that gives me a remainder 2. 12 into 20 goes 1, so 1/12 is 12. So that gives me a remainder of 8. So 6/12 is 72. So 6 down, that gives me a remainder of 8. So, and here we can see we're going to end up with a recurring 6. So 5 divided by 12 is 0.416666 recurring. So there's our decimal. And if I want to write that as a percentage, just multiply it by 100. We can say it's 41.67%. Or to one decimal place, just 41.7%. Be asked to solve some problems involving percentages. So in Salisbury there were 47 sunny days in July and August. So in July we know there are 31 days, and in August there are also 31 days. I've written over a percentage. There are also 31 days, so in total 62 days. Now 47 of those days were sunny, so that's 47 out of 62 days were sunny. We want to know what percentage of the days in the 2 months, that is. Well, using a calculator, we can work out what 47 over 62 is. Well, 47 divided by 62, we know if we use a calculator, 47 divided by 62 will give me 0.75806, round it up to a 5. Now if we want to change that into a percentage, I then multiply this by 100. So multiplying that by 100% will give me 75.8% to 1 decimal place. In this question, we're comparing the lengths of a smart car and a bus, and we're writing one as a percentage of the other. Now read the question carefully and have a go. I'll pause the video and then check your answers. Now it's really important that you read these questions carefully. So the first thing to do is, what percentage of the length of the bus, is the length of the smart car? So the total length we're looking at, what fraction of the length of the bus is the smart car? So we want 2.5 over 10. So 2.5 over 10. Remember, we can't mix decimals and fractions. So that will become 25, multiplying both top and bottom by 10. Gives me 25 over 100, so 25%. So this. Now the second question says, what percentage of the length of the smart car, so of, that's going to be in our denominator, is the length of the bus? So that becomes 10 over 25. Now, important to check units. They're both in meters, so I didn't need to worry about them, and I can leave the units out of the calculation. So again, we have, if I multiply both top and bottom by 10, I'll get 100 over 25, which is 4. So that's our fraction, but if you like, it's a whole number, but it's really a fraction. So to change that into a percent, I then need to say, okay, take the 4, multiply it by 100%, will give me 400%. It's your final answer. So that means that the bus is 4 times bigger than the smart car. So be careful with those sorts of questions. Make sure you're getting your numbers the right way round in the fraction. So this concludes our first lesson on fractions and converting our decimals into fractions and into percentages and all the other combinations of conversion. What I'd like you to do now is to continue working through exercise 11A. Do as much as you can. As long as you've all managed to do up to the end of question 4, 5, 6, that should be fine. Some of you will be able to move on and have a go at some of the other questions, 7 to 11. But all have a go, and I'll post up the answers later.